The princess sat alone in her chamber high above the city lights of the royal capital, her eyes lost in the endless dark of space beyond the window. The night was calm, but her mind was not, for she carried a memory that had never faded, a moment from long ago that still burned bright inside her heart. She remembered the heat of fire, the smell of smoke, and the sound of alarms screaming in the distance. She had been only a child then, small and frightened, hidden inside a narrow storage room on the Royal Space Station. Outside, the sounds of battle had raged, voices shouting, metal tearing, explosions shaking the floor under her feet. She had held her breath and prayed that someone would find her before the rebels did. Through the thick smoke, a figure had appeared, not one of her people, but tall and broad, wearing strange armor scratched and burned, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes calm and steady. She had never seen a human before. Her people had been taught to fear them. But this one knelt down and spoke to her with a voice that was warm and strong, telling her she would be safe now. He had lifted her into his arms and run through corridors filled with fire and falling debris. The air was thick and hot, sparks flying around them like tiny stars. She had clung to him, hearing the thud of his boots against the floor, the crack of enemy weapons, the hum of his own rifle as he fired back without slowing down. When they reached the hangar, the chaos was worse. Enemy fighters attacking, soldiers shouting, ships lifting off in a rush to escape. The human had moved like he knew every path, weaving through the danger with her pressed close against his chest. Finally reaching a small shuttle hidden in the shadows, he had placed her inside and sealed the door, his eyes meeting hers one last time. He had said only 4 words before turning away. "You will be safe now," and then he was gone, disappearing into the smoke, the shuttle lifting away into the black of space, leaving her staring back at the shrinking image of the burning station and the man who had saved her life. For years after that day, she had tried to find him. She had asked every commander, searched every record, but no name ever matched. No soldier ever stepped forward to claim the act. Humans were rare in her empire. Many had left after the long war, and those who stayed lived far from the royal worlds. She began to wonder if she would ever see him again, but the memory stayed, sharper than any dream. She could still feel the strength of his arms as he carried her, still hear the calm in his voice even when everything around them was falling apart. She had grown from a frightened child into a woman who wore the crown. Yet part of her was still that little girl looking up into the eyes of a human who risked everything for her. Tonight was different though, for on her desk lay a single message that had arrived without warning. No royal seal, no sender name, only a short line of text. "We should meet." It had taken her breath away, something deep inside her telling her that this was not a trap, that the one she had waited for might finally be reaching out. The palace around her was quiet, her guards unaware of her thoughts. The city beyond glittered like a sea of stars, but her mind was already far away, racing toward the possibility that after all these years, she would finally stand face to face with the human who had saved her. She rose from her seat and touched the glass of the window, her reflection looking back at her, older, stronger, but with the same heart that had once beat fast in the arms of a stranger. She did not know why he had chosen this time to appear, what he wanted to say, or what would happen after they met. But she knew one thing. She had to go. Outside, the royal shuttle waited on the landing platform, its engines humming softly, the night air cool against her face. As she stepped into the open, the stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if they too sensed the turning of fate. And somewhere out there, in the vast dark of space, a man was waiting. A man who had once carried a little girl through fire, and whose voice still echoed in her soul. She took a deep breath and walked forward, her heart steady but her mind filled with questions, each step bringing her closer to answers, to truth, and to the meeting she had dreamed of for so long. The memory that never faded was about to become real again, and she could not turn back now. The royal shuttle glided out of the city and into the cold reach of the upper atmosphere, the glow of the capital fading beneath them. The princess sat by the window with her hood drawn low, the message still heavy in her mind, the words "we should meet" repeating again and again like a whisper she could not ignore. Her guards believed she was traveling to a nearby diplomatic station, a routine journey with nothing unusual. They had no idea that her true destination was far beyond the official route, a place few dared to go, a forgotten space station near the border where the Empire's influence grew weak, and the shadows grew strong. The pilot steered the shuttle along its hidden course, guided by coordinates only she knew, each minute carrying her farther from the safety of the palace. The stars outside seemed colder here, sharper against the endless black, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. She thought again of the man who had saved her years ago. She tried to imagine his face now, older perhaps, maybe changed by time and hardship. Would his eyes still hold the same calm strength? Would his voice still have that steady warmth that had cut through the smoke and fear? Hours passed in silence, until the shuttle dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Before her loomed the shape of the abandoned station, its great rings broken, its lights long dead. It drifted slowly against the backdrop of a distant red sun, like a ghost from a forgotten war. The princess stood, her heart beating faster. She told the guards to remain aboard, claiming she wished to inspect the place alone for her report. They protested, but she reminded them of their duty to obey, and reluctantly they agreed. She took a small personal craft from the shuttle's hold, and piloted it toward the silent station. Inside the docking bay, the air was stale, the walls lined with old scorch marks from battles past. She stepped out into the dim light, her boots echoing on the metal floor. The station was quiet, yet she felt she was not alone. The air seemed to hum with unseen presence. Her footsteps carried her down narrow corridors, past doors half open, and hallways littered with debris. The glow from her wrist light cut through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to watch her, the memory of his voice still guiding her forward. Finally, she entered a wide chamber, the ceiling high above, the walls lined with cracked screens and silent machines. At the far end, a figure stood waiting, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture firm. He wore old battle armor, dented and scarred, and though his hair was now streaked with gray, his eyes were the same, calm and steady. She froze, breath-catching. It was him. There was no doubt. The lines of his face were sharper, his skin marked by years of struggle, but she knew him as surely as she knew her own reflection. For a moment neither spoke, the stillness between them heavy. Then he took a step forward, and his voice broke the silence. "It has been a long time, princess." Her heart leaped at the sound. The same warmth, the same quiet strength. It was as if no years had passed. She took a step closer, her hands trembling despite her control. "You are real," she said softly. "I thought maybe I imagined you all this time." He shook his head slowly. "No, you were never imagining. I was there. I carried you out of that fire, and I have been watching from the shadows ever since." Questions swirled in her mind. Why now? Why had he called for her after so many years? What had changed? She asked him, her voice unsteady, and he looked away for a moment before answering. "Because there is something you must know. Something that will change everything you believe about that night." The chamber seemed to grow colder, the hum of the station louder in her ears. His words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. She could feel that whatever truth he carried was heavy, dangerous, and perhaps painful. Before she could speak again, a faint noise echoed down the corridor they had both come from. The sharp rhythm of boots on metal, slow but drawing nearer. Daniel's eyes narrowed, and his hand moved instinctively toward the weapon at his side. "You were followed," he said in a low voice. She shook her head. "My guards stayed on the shuttle." But even as she said it, she knew he was right. The sound was too measured, too deliberate. Without another word, he motioned for her to follow him, leading her through a side passage away from the docking bay. Their steps, quick but silent, the air growing colder as they moved deeper into the station, the shadows seeming to close in around them. She could feel the tension rising, the strange mix of fear and trust she had felt as a child returning to her now. She knew she was stepping into something far larger than she had imagined when she left the palace. Whatever truth he carried, whatever danger followed them, one thing was certain. Her life was no longer her own, and the memory that had never faded was about to become the beginning of something far greater. The air inside the old passage felt thin and cold, each breath carrying the scent of dust and metal. The princess followed close behind the man she had once known only as her rescuer, her mind racing with questions, her steps echoing softly in the dark as they moved deeper into the silent station. The sound of boots from before had faded, yet she knew they were not alone. Daniel kept his hand near the weapon on his hip, his movements sharp and precise. He seemed to know every turn, every hidden route, as if this place had been his home for years. Finally they reached a small control room, the door sliding closed. Behind them, with a low hiss, Daniel turned to face her, the dim glow from a single working console lighting the sharp lines of his face. His voice was low but steady as he spoke. "My name is Daniel Reed," he said, "captain of the Human Defense Forces." During the last war, the princess felt the name sink into her mind. It was the first piece of truth she had ever been given about him. She repeated it quietly, as if to make it real. "Daniel Reed." He nodded once, his gaze steady. "I was part of the last defense before your station fell. I was ordered to hold the outer ring, but when I learned that a royal child was trapped inside the burning sector, I broke orders. I went in alone, and I found you." She stepped closer, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. "Why did you never come forward? Why hide all these years?" Daniel's expression darkened. Humans were not welcome after the war. Many were hunted. Some were forced to leave. If I had appeared before your court, they would have executed me before I could speak, so I stayed in the shadows. I watched from afar, making sure you lived, making sure you were safe. The princess felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. Anger that her own people could act with such cruelty, the sadness that he had carried this burden alone for so long. She asked again, "But why now? Why send for me?" Daniel's eyes shifted toward the console, his voice quieter now. "Because the attack that night was not what it seemed. It was not a random strike by rebels. It was planned from inside your own court." Her heart seemed to stop for a moment, the words settling heavy in the air. She shook her head. "That cannot be true." "I have proof," Daniel said, his tone leaving no space for doubt. "I kept it hidden for years because I knew it would tear your empire apart. But now, the same people who ordered your death are moving again. They are preparing something worse." The princess felt her pulse quicken, her mind pulling back to memories of that night, the suddenness of the attack, the way the rebels had known exactly where to strike, the corridors they had taken. She realized it all could be true. Before she could speak, the console beeped softly. Daniel moved quickly. Pressing a key, a small hologram appeared, showing faint red lights, moving across a station map. They were not alone. Multiple figures were spreading through the corridors, moving toward their position. "Bounty hunters," Daniel said under his breath. "They must have tracked my signal when I sent you the message." The princess stepped back, fear mixing with resolve. "Then we cannot stay here." Daniel nodded. "There is a way out, but we must move now." He reached into a locker and pulled out a small blaster, handing it to her. She hesitated, the weight of it heavy in her hands. "Do you know how to use it?" he asked. She met his eyes. "I will learn." They slipped out through another side door, the station around them now alive with the sound of distant footsteps and the low hum of systems coming back online after years of sleep. Somewhere deep in the metal walls, machinery stirred, as if the hunters were waking the station itself to aid their pursuit. Daniel led her through a maze of corridors, sometimes stopping to listen, sometimes doubling back to avoid patrols. The princess could feel the tension in every step, the sense that they were moving closer not only to escape, but to some truth she was not yet ready to face. At last they reached a cargo bay, dark except for thin beams of light cutting through gaps in the hull. At the far end rested a small, well-worn ship, its hull scratched but strong. Daniel moved ahead, tapping a sequence into a hidden panel. The ship's ramp, lowering with a low hiss. Before they could board, voices echoed from the shadows, sharp and cold. Figures stepped into the light, armored and armed, their helmets reflecting the faint glow. One of them spoke. "The bounty is worth more if she is alive." The princess felt Daniel tense beside her, his voice low and steady. "Stay behind me." But she shook her head. "No, you saved me once. I will not hide this time." The hunters raised their weapons. The air in the cargo bay, thick with silence, the kind that comes only before violence. Daniel's hand hovered over his blaster, his eyes fixed on the lead hunter. The princess's heart beat fast, but her grip on the weapon tightened. Somewhere in the distance, the deep groan of the station's old engines filled the air, as if the place itself knew that something was about to change forever. The standoff in the cargo bay, stretched like a wire pulled too tight. The hunters stood in a half circle, their weapons pointed steady. The princess could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Daniel's stance was calm but ready, his eyes never leaving the lead hunter. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," Daniel said, his voice low, but the hunters gave no sign of hesitation. Their leader stepped forward, the dark visor hiding his eyes. "The contract says alive, but dead is easier." The princess felt heat rise in her chest, a mix of fear and anger, her fingers tightening on the blaster Daniel had given her. She glanced at him, waiting for a signal. In that instant he moved, dropping low and firing in one smooth motion. The sound of the shot filling the bay, the hunters scattered for cover, blaster fire lighting the shadows. Daniel pulled the princess behind a stack of old cargo containers, the metal sparking as shots struck near them. "Stay down," he ordered, leaning out to return fire, his aim precise, forcing the hunters to keep their distance. The princess felt the weight of the blaster in her hands, her pulse racing. She thought of the night so many years ago when Daniel had carried her through danger. Now she was here beside him, older, stronger, and with a choice to make. One of the hunters broke cover. Moving fast toward their flank, without thinking she raised her weapon and fired, the bolt striking the wall beside the attacker and forcing him back. Her hands shook, but her aim had been true enough to give Daniel an opening. He nodded once. A quick silent approval. They could not hold here for long. Daniel knew it. The hunters were trained and patient. The cargo bay had too many angles for ambush. He motioned for her to follow, and they slipped through a narrow service door at the far end, the heavy clang of boots following close behind. The corridor beyond was narrow and dark, the walls lined with pipes that hissed with the slow leak of ancient air systems. Daniel moved quickly, leading her deeper into the station. After several turns, they reached a sealed hatch. He tapped a code into a hidden panel, and the door slid open with a groan. Inside was a small room, lit by the pale blue glow of a single screen. Cables and old data drives were piled on a metal desk. Daniel crossed the room and began working at the console, his fingers moving with practiced speed. "This is where I kept it," he said without looking up. "The proof. The records from the night of the attack, intercepted transmissions from inside your own court. Orders given to the rebels on where and when to strike." The princess stepped closer, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. "You have been carrying this all these years." He nodded. "Never sending it, never speaking of it, because if I had, the Empire would have torn itself apart. But now they are moving again, and you need to see who they are." The screen flickered, and the recordings began to play. Distorted voices giving orders, the words cold and clear. The princess recognized some of them, members of the council, people she had trusted since childhood. Her breath caught. She stepped back as if the air had grown heavier. "They tried to kill me," she whispered. Daniel turned to her, his gaze steady. "Yes. And they will try again, unless we stop them." The sound of movement outside the room grew louder. The hunters had found their trail. Daniel shut off the console and pulled the data drive free, slipping it into a pouch at his belt. "Time to go," he said. They slipped back into the corridor. But this time the hunters were already there, blocking the way. The princess and Daniel turned and ran the other direction, the station groaning around them, as if the chase had woken its old bones. Daniel led her down a set of steep maintenance stairs, the metal vibrating under their boots. Somewhere far below, the sound of machinery churned to life. The princess realized the hunters might be trying to trap them by sealing off the lower decks. They reached a massive chamber where old engines lay silent, their surfaces coated in dust. Daniel crossed quickly to a side hatch, opening it to reveal a narrow crawl space. "In here," he said. She followed, the metal walls pressing close as they moved on hands and knees, the sound of boots above them a constant reminder that they were not safe. The tunnel opened into another docking bay, this one smaller, with only a single battered shuttle resting. In the gloom, Daniel moved toward it, checking the controls. "It will fly," he said, "but we will have to clear the launch path." The princess looked toward the wide bay doors, thick layers of rust sealing them shut. Before she could ask how, Daniel was already working at a side panel, sparks flying as he forced the ancient systems back to life. The hunters' voices echoed from the far corridor. They were almost here. Daniel looked over his shoulder at her, the heat from the sparking panel lighting his face. "When we leave here, everything changes. They will know the truth, and they will come for us both." The princess met his gaze, her voice steady, despite the fear in her chest. "Then let them come." The bay doors began to creak open, light spilling in from the void beyond. The old shuttle's engines roared awake, the sound filling the bay, and for the first time since she had received his message, the princess felt that the future was no longer a mystery she feared, but a path she was ready to walk. The shuttle's engines roared louder, filling the docking bay with a deep vibration that shook the rust from the walls. The princess stood near the ramp, her blaster ready, while Daniel worked the controls to bring the ancient ship to life. The bay doors were still grinding open, slow and stubborn from years of neglect. From the far corridor came the sharp sound of boots striking metal. The hunters were close now, their voices carrying over the engine noise. Daniel looked over his shoulder at her, his expression steady but urgent. "We move the moment the doors are wide enough," he said. The princess nodded, her grip firm on the blaster. She could feel the tension in the air, the way each second felt heavier than the last. The first hunter appeared in the doorway, his armor glinting in the flickering bay lights. He raised his weapon, but the princess fired first, the bolt striking the wall beside him and forcing him to dive for cover. More hunters spilled into the bay, fanning out along the shadows, their blasters sending streaks of red light across the room. Daniel dropped into the pilot's seat, his fingers moving over the controls. The shuttle's systems groaned awake. Warning, lights flashing. The princess kept low by the ramp, firing in short bursts. Every shot aimed to keep the hunters from getting too close. The grinding of the bay doors grew louder as they inched open, revealing the deep black of space beyond. Daniel's voice carried over the chaos. Almost there. Hold them off. The princess ducked behind a stack of old supply crates, her breathing fast, the smell of ozone sharp in her nose. She could see the hunters moving with precision, trying to flank them. Her heart pounded as she realized they were not just here for Daniel. They were here for her too. One hunter broke from cover, charging toward the ramp. She turned and fired, the blast striking his shoulder and spinning him to the ground. Daniel's voice came again. Now, get in. She ran up the ramp, the metal vibrating under her feet as the shuttle's engines surged to full power. Daniel slammed a control, and the ramp began to rise, sealing them inside. The ship lifted from the bay floor, just as the hunters opened fire in a storm of red bolts. The shuttle shot forward, clearing the half-open doors with a burst of speed. The sudden silence of space replacing the echo of the bay, but the quiet lasted only a moment, as sensors began to beep sharply. Daniel's eyes narrowed. They have ships out there. The princess moved to the co-pilot's seat, watching the display as several small hunter craft detached from the station, their engines flaring bright against the dark. They were fast and well-armed, and closing in. Daniel pushed the shuttle hard, weaving between pieces of drifting debris. The hunters following in a tight formation. Blaster fire streaked past them, lighting the dark like falling stars. The princess gripped the edge of her seat, her voice steady despite the rush of fear. We cannot outrun them for long. Daniel's gaze stayed on the stars ahead. Then we do not outrun them, we lose them. He cut the shuttle sharply to the left, diving toward the shadow of a massive asteroid field. The hunters followed, their ships darting through the jagged rocks, each turn tight and dangerous. Daniel used the asteroids as cover, swinging the shuttle through narrow gaps, sometimes so close the hull scraped against stone. The princess fired the rear guns whenever a hunter came too close, her shots forcing them back or sending them spinning away. They wove deeper into the field, the light from the distant sun fading as rock and shadow closed around them. Daniel pulled the shuttle into a sharp climb, breaking into a small hollow space hidden between three massive asteroids. He cut the engines to a low hum. The ship drifting in darkness, the hunters swept past, their scanners reaching but not finding them. Daniel kept still, every muscle tense as they waited. The princess held her breath, listening to the faint ping of the scanners fading away. After long minutes the hunters moved on, their ships vanishing into the distance. Daniel brought the engines back to life, the sound soft at first, then steady. They eased out of the hiding place and back into open space. The princess looked at him, her voice quiet. You have done this before. A faint smile touched his lips. More times than I can count, but this time is different. This time they were after both of us. She leaned back in her seat, the reality settling heavy. The court conspirators had sent hunters to capture or kill them before they could return. It meant the danger was far greater than she had imagined. Daniel's eyes were fixed on the stars ahead. We need to get far from their reach. But we also need to get this proof to someone who can act before they silence you. The princess looked at the small pouch at his belt, the data drive holding the truth about the night that had changed her life. It was more than evidence. It was a weapon, one that could shake the empire itself. She understood now why Daniel had stayed hidden so long, and why coming forward now meant risking everything. Outside, the endless dark stretched before them. Somewhere ahead lay the next move, the next danger, but also the chance to change everything. The princess tightened her grip on the arm of her seat, her voice firm. Then let us go where they will not expect us. Daniel nodded once, setting a new course. The stars began to shift as the shuttle turned, and with each passing moment, the old memory of fire and fear felt less like a wound and more like the spark of a coming storm. The hall was filled with whispers as the princess stood before the gathering, her eyes locked on the human who had saved her long ago. The air was heavy with curiosity and a sense of something important about to happen. She took a slow breath and began to speak, her voice steady, but carrying an emotion that made everyone listen. With care, the human named Elias stood still, unsure of what was about to come. His mind raced back to the years before, when danger had surrounded the young princess, and he had acted without thinking, placing himself between her and the threat. It was a moment that had never left his memory, and yet he had never expected to meet her again, especially in such a grand place, surrounded by the leaders of many worlds. The princess stepped closer, her long gown trailing behind her, and the light from above casting a soft glow around her. She spoke of the night she had been saved, describing the fear she had felt, and the relief when she saw him standing there facing danger for her. She said that no day had passed without her remembering his face and his bravery. Her words were gentle, yet strong, carrying the weight of truth. The crowd was silent, every ear straining to hear her next words. She spoke of how the event had shaped her life, how she had grown determined to be more than a figurehead. In a royal seat, she had decided to lead with courage, and to honor those who stood for what was right, even when it was difficult. She looked into Ilias's eyes, and said that he had been her example, her guide in secret. Though he had never known, Ilias felt the room fade round him, as her words settled into his mind. It was strange to think that a single act, years ago, could ripple through time, and change the path of another's life. He had never sought thanks, and yet here it was, in a way he could never have imagined. Her voice carried not only gratitude, but also something deeper, something that hinted at a bond that went beyond simple history. The princess then turned to the assembly, her voice rising with a new strength. She declared that the human before them was not only her savior, but a symbol of what humanity could bring to the galaxy. She spoke of courage, resilience, and the will to stand firm when others would falter. Her words stirred something in the hearts of those listening, and she could see the shift in their faces as they considered what she said. Ilias felt the weight of many eyes on him, some filled with respect, others with doubt. He knew that in this hall were those who did not see humans as equals, those who would prefer to keep them in the shadows. Yet the princess's words had lit a spark, one that could not easily be put out. He wondered if this was the beginning of something larger than either of them could control. The princess reached for a small object in her hand, a silver emblem marked with the royal crest. She stepped forward and held it out to Ilias, telling him it was a token of her promise to him and to all who believed in unity between their kinds. She said it would serve as a reminder that no act of kindness, no moment of courage, was ever truly forgotten. Ilias took the emblem, his hand closing around it, and feeling its weight, both real and symbolic. He nodded slowly, unable to find the right words, but knowing that his silence spoke enough. The princess smiled, and for a brief moment, the grand hall felt smaller, as if it were only the two of them sharing a quiet truth. The assembly erupted in murmurs, some voices full of support, others laced with suspicion, but the princess stood firm, her hand still lingering in the air, as if daring anyone to challenge her. Ilias realized that whatever came next, this moment had already set a path in motion, and neither of them could step back from it. Now, as the night went on, and the gathering slowly dispersed, the princess and Ilias remained near the great balcony, overlooking the city below. The lights glittered like stars, and the wind carried the faint sound of music from somewhere far away. She told him that the days ahead would be hard, that there would be those who sought to undo the connection they had made today, but she also promised that she would not waver. Ilias looked out at the city, feeling a strange mix of uncertainty and determination. He knew that change never came easily, but he also knew that with allies like her, the fight was worth it. The princess's promise was not only to him, but to the future of both their peoples, and he felt ready to face whatever challenges would come next. The next morning, the city was alive with talk of the princess's speech. Some called it a moment of hope, others whispered it was a mistake that would bring trouble from those who wished to keep humans silent. Ilias walked through the streets, hearing voices from every corner, some speaking his name with pride, others spitting it like a curse. He kept his head high, but inside he felt the weight of what had begun the night before. The princess was in her private chamber, surrounded by advisors who argued over her choice. They warned her of the backlash that could come from powerful factions, but she sat calmly listening to their words, and then telling them that her decision was final. She reminded them that her people had always valued courage and truth, and that she would not betray those values simply to keep the peace. Her tone was calm yet strong, leaving no doubt that her mind was set. Meanwhile, far beyond the city, in the council halls of other worlds, the story was spreading, each retelling carrying the image of a human standing beside a princess, and the promise of unity. It was a sight that stirred feelings in many hearts. Some saw a chance for a better future. Others saw a threat to the order they had built over centuries in hidden rooms. Plans were already being made to test this new alliance, and see if it could be broken. Ilias was brought to the royal courtyard, where the princess waited for him. Her gown today was simpler, yet it carried the colors of both her house and the flag of Earth, a silent message to all who saw it. She told Ilias that they would soon travel to the Great Assembly, where leaders from across the galaxy would gather. It was there she planned to speak again, and this time her words would not be to one hall, but to countless worlds at once. He listened quietly, knowing that such a stage would draw both allies and enemies. He asked her if she was afraid, and she smiled, saying fear was natural, but letting it rule her would only lead to failure. She told him she trusted him to stand beside her, not as a guard, not as a servant, but as a friend who had already proven his worth in the most dangerous of moments. Her words warmed something deep inside him, and he felt his doubts fade. The journey to the great assembly took them through the silent stretches of space, stars drifting past like frozen sparks. Each day the princess and Elias spoke of the speech she would give. She wanted it to be simple, so that no world could claim they did not understand her meaning. She wanted to speak of kindness and strength, of how one act could ripple through time and change lives far beyond what anyone expected. Elias told her the truth of that night, long ago, how he had acted without thinking, only wanting to protect a young girl in danger. She listened with quiet eyes, and when he finished, she said, that was exactly why his story mattered. When they arrived, the great assembly was already crowded, vast chambers, filled with voices in 100 languages. The princess walked in beside Elias, her head held high. The sight of them together drew gasps and murmurs, but she kept her gaze steady as they stepped to the center. When she began to speak, her voice carried through the halls and into the broadcasts that would reach across the stars. She told the story of a night years ago, a girl in danger, and a human who stepped forward. She spoke of the years that followed, and the promise she now carried to build a galaxy where courage and kindness were not rare things, but the very foundation of peace. Her words flowed like a river, steady and clear, each sentence building on the last, until the chamber was utterly silent. Her voice never shook, even when she spoke of the forces that would try to stop such a dream. She called on every world to see beyond fear, to choose unity over division, and she ended by holding up the silver emblem Elias had given her, the symbol of her promise. Elias stood beside her, watching the faces in the crowd. Some softened, some hardened, but none were unmoved. When she finished, the silence held for a moment longer before breaking into a wave of voices, some in support, some in anger. Yet even in the noise, Elias knew something had shifted. Her words would not be forgotten. They would travel across the stars, carried in whispers and shouts, changing the hearts of those willing to listen. Later, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the capital of the assembly world, the princess turned to Elias and said that no matter what came next, the seed had been planted. It might take years or even generations to grow, but it would grow because the truth had been spoken, and once spoken, it could not be erased. He nodded and felt the same certainty above them. The stars shone like watchful eyes, each one a world that had heard her words, and somewhere out there among them were those ready to join them in the fight for the future. The princess smiled faintly and said that the galaxy would never be the same again, and Elias believed her, for the words she had spoken would echo forever.